Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Eric. I'm continuing to talk about science fiction movies here in this series. I'm up to the mid 1980s right now. Today I'm going to talk about Chopping Mall. See the poster right there. Um, the tagline is "Where shopping costs you an arm and a leg." So now, by the title, you might think this is a slasher movie from the 80s with some madman running amok in a mall, and I have to think there had to have been a slasher set in a mall. There just had to have been, but I didn't look that up. But anyway, this is robots running amok. So that's where the sci-fi element comes into it, where it's at the mall and a new fleet of robots are built to, you know, basically be the security force at the mall. So that's the premise of this film, and this was directed by Jim Wynorski. A cast of mostly unknowns. The lead is Kelly Maroney, who she was in Year the Night of the Comet from 1984, a really good movie that I've talked about in a previous video. So not too many notables in the cast, although there were some cameos. Dick Miller makes a cameo as a janitor, and there's also Mary Warnoff and Paul Bartel make a cameo, who maybe not super well known today, but they had made the film Eating Raoul from the early '80s, which is a really good satire from the decade, and they're reprising the characters they played in that film. So those are interesting cameo. Mary Warnoff was also in Night of the Comet as well, I should mention. So that's a little bit on the cast of this film. The original title was Killbots, but it was changed. So this is a pretty prototypical '80s movie. You have a bunch of young people working in this mall. Of course, there's an electrical storm. Electrical storm comes along, and the robots start going crazy and start harming people, killing people by shooting lasers, and they have these blades they can use, and they're just going crazy. This happens after hours. All the people, well, the young people working in the mall, they're kind of partying afterwards in the furniture store and having a pretty wild party in there, and and then things, of course, quickly go bad. And that's the movie. And then the rest of the movie, the teenage or they're not teenagers. They look more like early 20s, who are they have to figure out a way to fight off these robots. And the robots are not too menacing in this film. They're not like the Terminator T-1000 or whatever, which those are terrifying with the red eyes and the skeletal figures. These robots look pretty benevolent, but I guess don't be fooled, because they're killers. So this is a schlocky science fiction film. I know it's gained some cult following through the years because, first of all, it is set in a mall, and you can kind of group it with movies like Dawn of the Dead, set in a mall. They actually filmed at the same mall where Fast Times at Ridgemont High was shot, so definitely some connections there. But the mall is such a symbol of the '80s, of consumerism and youth culture of the '80s. Just such a So I think any movie that has a mall that's the primary setting will gain a cult following over time, and I know there's a lot of nostalgia for that. And I think overall this film, like, you had like the trauma movies, like the Toxic Avenger and those, which were super extreme schlock happening at this during this time period. But you would occasionally still get, like the more. I think this was a Roger Corman part of his operation. You'd still get those kind of low budget schlock films at that time. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed watching it this time. If you're having a rough day, I guess if you want to come down and watch something with some humor and with some mostly low stakes action, and this one, there's a little bit of gore. They threw in some gore, just to get some people in there, get some audiences going, and there's like nudity and stuff like that too. So, which kind of leads me to something about this movie felt a little like long in the tooth because in the early 80s, you get a lot of those more raunchier teenage comedies like, I don't know, Porky's or Revenge of the Nerds, movies of that type. And Chopping Mall is a little bit, even with like the Friday the 13th movies with, the promiscuous young people and you know, they all get slaughtered by Jason, and Chopping Mall too, where the two promiscuous characters, of course, are the first victims of the robots. So it keeps that trope going, but it is one of the things, like, I think, going in order through the decades and watching these movies is that you start to see patterns, and you gradually start to see patterns change, and especially with science fiction films, but this movie's kind of tangential to like teenage films and even horror slasher films. And yeah, like an early part of the decade, those really raunchy teenage films. And by the time we get to the mid late 80s, teen movies start to become a little more serious, a little more earnest. Like Say Anything, the Cameron Crowe movie comes to mind, or even something like Stand By Me, I guess you could throw in there, and Pump Up the Volume. I think that was a 90s movie, but that late 80s, early 90s, we start to see more. Heather's another one from the end of the 80s, which is, there was that John Hughes template of movies for young people, which were kind of earnest and kind of funny, but they even start to mature even a little bit beyond the John Hughes films by the end of the decade. So you do start to see that change, and this film, Chopping Mall, felt a little bit like it was more of the early '80s with a lot of the sophomoric humor running through the entire film. So yeah, that was just one observation I wanted to make about as '80s cinema was changing as you go along. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Chopping Mall. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye.